atomic energy, not always completely effective, but it has worked in many respects. So I think there are international models here where, frankly, the United States is a leader by example, and best practices are adopted by other countries when we support them. And frankly, in this instance, the EU has been ahead of us in many respects regarding social media. And we are following their leadership by example. I want to come to this issue of having centers, whether they're in China or, for that matter, elsewhere in the world, requiring safeguards so that we are not allowing our technology to be misused in China against the Uyghurs, and preventing that technology from being stolen or people we train there from serving bad purposes. Are you satisfied, Mr. Smith, that it is possible, in fact, that you are doing it in China, that is preventing the evils that could result from doing business there in that way?
I would say two things. First, I feel good about our track record and our vigilance and the constant need for us to be vigilant about what services we offer to whom and how they're used. It's really those three things. And I would take from that what I think is probably the conversation we'll need to have as a country about export controls more broadly. There's three fundamental areas of technology where the United States is today, I would argue, the global leader. First, the GPU chips from a company like NVIDIA. Second, the cloud infrastructure from a company like, say, Microsoft. And the third is the foundation model from a firm such as OpenAI. And of course, Google and AWS and other companies are global leaders as well. And I think if we want to feel that we're good in creating jobs in the United States by inventing and manufacturing here, as you said, Senator Hawley, which I completely endorse, and good that technology is being used properly, we probably need an export control regime that weaves those three things together. For example, there might be a country in the world, let's just set aside China for a moment, leave that out. There's another country where you all in the executive branch would say, we have some qualms, but we want U.S. technology to be present, and we want U.S. technology to be used properly, the way that would make you feel good. You might say, then we'll let NVIDIA export chips to that country to be used in, say, a data center of a company that we trust, that is licensed, even here, for that use, with the model being used in a secure way in that data center, with a know your customer requirement, and with guardrails that put certain kinds of use off limits. That may well be where government policy needs to go and how the tech sector needs to support the government and work with the government to make it a reality.
I think that that answer is very insightful and raises other questions. I would kind of analogize this situation to nuclear proliferation. We cooperate over safety in some respects with other countries, some of them adversaries, but we still do everything in our power to prevent American companies from helping China or Russia in their nuclear programs. Part of that non-proliferation effort is through export controls. We impose sanctions. We have limits and rules around selling and sharing certain choke point technologies related to nuclear enrichment, as well as biological warfare, surveillance, and other national security risks. And our framework, in fact, envisions sanctions and safeguards precisely in those areas for exactly the reasons we've been discussing here. Last October, the Biden administration used existing legal authorities as a first step in blocking the sale of some high-performance chips and equipment to make those chips to China, and our framework calls for export controls and sanctions and legal restrictions. So I guess a question that we will be discussing, we're not going to resolve it today, regrettably, but we would appreciate your input going forward, and I'm inviting any of the listening audience here in the room or elsewhere to participate in this conversation on this issue and others. How should we draw a line on the hardware and technology that American companies are allowed to provide anyone else in the world? Any other adversaries or friends? Because as you've observed, Mr. Daly, and I think all of us accept, it's easily proliferated.
Yeah, if I could comment on this,
Sure.
I think you drew an analogy to nuclear regulation, and mentioned the word choke point. And I think the difference here is that there really isn't a choke point, and I think there's a careful balance to be made between limiting where our chips go and what they're used for, and disadvantaging American companies and the whole food chain that feeds them, because we're not the only people who make chips that can do AI. I wish we were, but we're not. There are companies around the world that can do it. There are other American companies. There are companies in Asia. There are companies in Europe. And if people can't get the chips they need to do AI from us, they will get them somewhere else. And what will happen then is, it turns out the chips aren't really the things that make them useful. It's the software. And if all of a sudden the standard chips for people to do AI become something from, pick a country, Singapore, all of a sudden all the software engineers will start writing all the software for those chips. They'll become the dominant chips. And the leadership of that technology area will have shifted from the U.S. to Singapore or whatever other country becomes dominant. So we have to be very careful to balance the national security considerations and the abuse of technology considerations against preserving the U.S. lead in this technology area.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, it's a really important point, and what you have is the argument, counter-argument. Let me for a moment channel what Senator Hawley often voices that I think is also important. Sometimes you can approach this and say, look, if we don't provide this to somebody, somebody else will, so let's not worry about it. I get it. But at the end of the day, whether you're a company or a country, I think you do have to have clarity about how you want your technology to be used. And, I fully recognize that there may be a day in the future after I retire from Microsoft when I look back. And I don't want to say, oh, we did something bad because if we didn't, somebody else would have. I want to say, no, we had clear values and we had principles and we had in place guardrails and protections, and we turned down sales so that somebody couldn't use our technology to abuse other people's rights. And if we lost some business, that's the best reason in the world to lose some business. And what's true of a company is true as a country. And so I'm not trying to say that your view shouldn't be considered. It should. That's why this issue is complicated, how to strike that balance.
Professor Hartzog, do you have any comment?
I think that was well said, and I would only add that it's also worth considering in this discussion about how we sort of safeguard these incredibly dangerous technologies and the risk that could happen if they, for example, proliferated. If it's so dangerous, then we need to revisit the existential question again. And I just bring it back to thinking not only about how we put guardrails on, but how we lead by example, which I think you brought up, which is really important. And we don't win the race to violate human rights, right? And that's not one that we want to be running.
And it isn't simply Chinese companies importing chips from the United States and building their own data centers. Most AI companies rent capabilities from cloud providers. We need to make sure that the cloud providers are not used to circumvent are export controls or sanctions. Mr. Smith, you raised the know your customer rules. Knowing your customers would require AI cloud providers whose models are deployed to know what companies are using those models. If you're leasing out a supercomputer, you need to make sure that your customer isn't the People's Liberation Army, that it isn't being used to subjugate Uyghurs, that it isn't used to do facial recognitions on dissidents or opponents in Iran, for example. But I do think that you've made a critical point, which is there is a moral imperative here. And I think there is a lesson in the history of this great country, the greatest in the history of the world, that when we lose our moral compass, we lose our way. And when we simply do economic or political interests, sometimes it's very short-sighted and we wander into a geopolitical swamp and quicksand. So I think these kinds of issues are very important to keep in mind when we lead by example. I want to just make a final point, and then if Senator Hawley has questions, we're going to let him ask. But on this issue of worker displacement, I mentioned at the very outset, I think we are on the cusp of a new industrial revolution. We've seen this movie before, as they say, and it didn't turn out that well. In the Industrial Revolution, where workers were displaced en masse, those textile factories and the mills in this country and all around the world went out of business, essentially, or replaced the workers with automation and mechanics. And I would respond by saying we need to train those workers. We need to provide education. You've alluded to it. And it needn't be a 4-year college. You know, in my state of Connecticut, Electric Boat, Pratt & Whitney, Sikorsky, defense contractors are going to need thousands of welders, electricians, tradespeople of all kinds who will have not just jobs, they'll have careers that require skills that, frankly, I wouldn't begin to know how to do. And I haven't the aptitude to do. And that's no false modesty. So I think there are tremendous opportunities here, not just in the creative spheres that you have mentioned, where, you know, we may think higher human talents may come into play, but in all kinds of jobs that are being created daily already in this country. And as I go around the state of Connecticut, the most common comment I hear from businesses, we can't find enough people to do the jobs we have right now. We can't find people to fill the openings that we have. And that is, in my view, maybe the biggest challenge for the American economy today.
I think that is such an important point, and it's really worth putting everything we think about for jobs, because I wholeheartedly endorse, Senator Hawley, what you were saying before about we want people to have jobs, we want them to earn a good living, et cetera. First, let's consider the demographic context in which jobs are created. The world has just entered a shift of the kind that it literally hasn't seen since the 1400s, namely populations that are leveling off or in much of the world now declining. One of the things we look at is every country and measure over 5-year periods is the working age population increasing or decreasing, and by how much. From 2020 to 2025, the working age population in this country, people aged 20 to 64, is only going to grow by 1 million people. The last time it grew by that small a number, you know who was president of the United States? John Adams. That's how far back you have to go. And if you look at a country like Italy, take that group of people over the next 20 years, it's going to decline by 41%. And what's true of Italy is true almost to the same degree in Germany. It's already happening in Japan, in Korea. So we live in a world where for many countries, we suddenly encounter what you actually find. I suspect when you go to Hartford or St. Louis or Kansas City, people can't find enough police officers, enough nurses, enough teachers. And that is a problem we need to desperately focus on solving. So how do we do that? I do think AI is something that can help. And even in something like a call center, one of the things that's fascinating to me, we have more than 3,000 customers around the world running proofs of concept. One fascinating one is a bank in the Netherlands. They said you go into a call center today, the desks of the workers look like a trading floor in Wall Street. They have 6 different terminals. Somebody calls. They're desperately trying to find the answer to a question. You know, with something like GPT-4, with our services, 6 terminals can become 1. Somebody who's working there can ask a question. The answer comes up. And what they're finding is that the person who's answering the phone, talking to a customer, can now spend more time concentrating on the customer and what they need. And I appreciate all the challenges. There's so much uncertainty. We desperately need to focus on skilling. But I really do hope that this is an era where we can use this to, frankly, help people fill jobs, get training, and focus more. Let's just put it this way. I'm excited about artificial intelligence. I'm even more excited about human intelligence. And if we can use artificial intelligence to help people exercise more human intelligence and earn more money doing so, that would be something that would be way more exciting to pursue than everything that we've had to grapple with the last decade around, say, social media and the like.
Well, our framework very much focuses on treatment of workers, about providing more training. It may not be something that this entity will do, but it is definitely something that it has to address. And it's not only displacement, but also working conditions and opportunities within the workplace for promotion, to prevent discrimination, to protect civil rights. We haven't talked about it in detail, but we deal with it in our framework in terms of transparency around decision-making. And, China may try to steal our technology, can't steal our people. And China has its own population challenges with the need for more people, skilled labor. But I say about Connecticut, we don't have gold mines or oil wells. What we have is a really able workforce. And that's going to be the key to, I think, America's economy in the future. And AI can help promote development of that workforce. Senator Hawley, anything?
Nothing further.
You all have been really patient, and so has our staff. I want to thank our staff for this hearing, but most important, we're going to continue these hearings. It is so helpful to us. I can go down our framework and tie the proposals to specific comments made by Sam Altman or others who have testified before, and we will enrich and expand our framework with the insights that you have given us. So I want to thank all of our witnesses, and again, look forward to continue our bipartisan approach here. You made that point, Mr. Smith. We have to be bipartisan and adopt full measures, not half measures. Thank you all. This hearing is adjourned.